There we go. It should be working. Let me just double check this here. All right, perfect. And so we're live. And so today I'm being joined by Umadcommander. We're going to sit down and have a nice little casual discussion about some of your favorite Third Age Total War mods. Specifically, we're going to be talking about multiplayer balance and kind of where the mods Silmarillion, Total War, Third Age, etc., are all kind of sitting right now, and where they could possibly go in the future, things that they can do to improve, things that they do particularly well, that sort of thing. Good morning, Jazz Deep and Matthew. Hope you guys are doing well. So Umadcommander, let me just thank you for coming, and we'll start off by asking, kind of what you think of the current. Let's start with Third Age Total War. What do you think of the current meta? What do you think is probably the most important thing in it? What do you think are some things that it does well, and maybe some things it can improve upon?
Hello. Right. So Reforged, I assume, not vanilla. That's not been relevant for quite a while.
No, not for many years.
Yeah, I think Reforged is in a better place than it was. A while back, there was sort of some. I think the thing with Reforged is it has sort of changed focus over the handful of years that it's been made, which has made it slightly awkward in certain patches because certain things get bolstered and certain things become useless. I like to think that certain things like really heavily armored crossbows are one of the potential problem areas because they're too easy to use, in my opinion. But that's I'm willing to concede that that's partially personal preference because they're not overpowered, but they are something. And that obviously Cardlin and Arabor have both got access to them. I was kind of interested to see where Khazad-dûm was going to go in the most recent patch because they were bolstered, and I think in particular making the First Legion armor piercing was potentially something that would skew things. But I think it's going to be something that constantly morphs over time, I would say.
You don't think there'll be a time when they'll hang up their hats and you can officially consider the project as being finished, and that's kind of the completed product, and there's really nowhere left to go from there?
I always think there's going to be some things that are stronger than others in Reforged, to be honest, based on how it's been developed. But I don't necessarily think that's the end of the world, because original Third Age back in the day, Gundabad and the Misty Mountains were worthless. You were doing well if you could win a battle with them. So it's much better than that. But I don't really know when it'll be finished anyway. It seems to be one of those things that's sort of constantly rolling on. So I don't really know. A
constant pillar in the community, just magnetic north. As long as at least Reforged is going on. 2020, it's not that bad.
Yep.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about Silmarillion. What are your impressions of playing it so far?
I think Silmarillion has benefited quite a lot from the design philosophies that have been put in place from the start. I think. You were involved with Reforged for a little while, so you probably took what you learned from there and then implemented it into Silmarillion, and it does benefit from that. You can see that in the sense that everyone's got their own things. Nothing has become omnipresent, which I do hope continues, because not so much pikes, but especially with rangers in Reforged, if you're on the defense and you don't have rangers, you lack access to a tool which can potentially get you upwards of 1,000 kills. And obviously there's still something that Assyrian in the current build of Silmarillion could potentially do, but the potential for that is much less because not most of the factions in the game have got access to this one tool which is really effective. You have to sort of build around knowing that. It's a similar story with pikes, but maybe not entirely the same, because pikes were never overpowered, but they did mean you could play a certain way with most factions in the game. Whereas that's not true in Silmarillion, which I do like. It means that you're more likely to find a faction that you like, and you can build yourself around that with a playstyle. Whereas in Reforged, there's a bit more blurred lines.
Right. So my question, and this is something that I've always been a little bit afraid of when I was going into Silmarillion with like the smaller rosters and the really focused play styles, is that I was just constantly worried that people would feel railroaded. Like there's like 2 or 3 compositions that you can really do anything with, and everything else is just kind of, yeah. There's like 3 or 4 units that you have to bring, and then you just kind of like fill it out maybe with like some, other stuff that's less important. Do you feel like that's where both of the mods are currently sitting, or do you think that both Silmarillion and Reforged have managed to kind of like avoid the cookie cutter builds for the most part?
I think with Silmarillion, I think you'll probably learn that as more things get added. I think because at the moment, obviously, when you add factions one by one, you sort of, especially with how the factions have got focuses, I think it'll be interesting to see how they develop when more factions with different focuses come in. Like, for example, if like say Angban's monsters, like they're really good against some factions but not so good against others. So with Angban, you have to sort of look who you're facing off against. And I think the smaller rosters, it's not necessarily a problem, because I think in Reforged, you will see most factions, they'll settle into, there's the dog in the background. But yeah,
of course, as is tradition.
With Reforged, I think you'll see even factions with large rosters settle into certain patterns. Like with Umbar, they've got a fairly sizable roster, but you'll always see them bring several units of Alcarondas Legion, because that's objectively the best way to play them. So I don't think smaller rosters are necessarily the wrong way to go. If you can give them like, I think maybe smaller variations is probably better, because you can fine tune it more easily, and you run into less like useless units, essentially. Like Noritino Cavalry from Ladra, sometimes you might see someone bring them to be different, but there's really no reason to bring them. Like then they offer no use that the better units won't. So I think a focused roster is probably better in many ways than one that just has a lot of units for the sake of it.
Fair enough. That's one of the things that I really struggled with when I was still working with the Reforged team, was there were so many things, and trying to find like really useful niches for everything was really a big struggle for me. Just a sec. I'm still stuffy from allergy season. So finding like a niche for things like there's like the tier Thera Lancers for Dol Amroth, and then they also had the Swan Knights, and they had that lower tier unit like the Doran Ernal Lancers or something like that. Trying to make each one of them something unique and different that you'd want to bring was pretty much a challenge, because people would either go one of 2 ways. Either they'd go with the highest tier thing, or they'd go with the mid-range thing, because that was the most cost effective.
That's still an issue with Lancers as well, because there's still no, like the more expensive ones, the bodyguard tier ones, you'll always bring them, even though the mainline Lancers are slightly better now with their morale. There's still no real reason to bring them if you have access to the real heavy hitters. Like for Rune, you'll never bring the Innis Rim if you can bring the Warlords and the Dragon Knights.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges of having a really big roster, is that, well, one, you get the diversity. Like there are some great things to like taking that approach, but you also, I feel you have to sort of balance the mod around the crappiest unit in order to kind of make things work. So if you're going to have a low tier Lancer unit, you're going to need to keep things like melee defense down, and you're going to want to keep things like armor higher, so that units like that can actually be effective, pretty well across the board, not just, in very specific matchups. Otherwise, for the most part, they never end up getting brought. And that's a choice that you can certainly make. But I think what I decided to do for Silmarillion Total War in any case was all of there's no like 4 out of 10 charge damage Lancers. Everything is like 6-15 and above, because then you can have more elite infantry for certain factions, like the Elven factions, of which there are many. And then you can tone down things like armor, for example, and that's going to have an effect on like missile units. So missile units are less powerful, but there's less armor anyway. But yeah, so you end up being able to. I feel like you're able to be a little bit more flexible, strangely enough, when you have less units that you have to worry about. And yeah, that's very much a conscious decision that I made going into Silmarillion. So that's something that I took away from Reforged. It's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, I think that's really the thing I would say. Like Silmarillion has benefited from having one way of looking at it from the start, whereas Reforged has changed, and it's done pretty well considering that. Like, it's changed pretty dramatically from the days of the Mithril Guard having like 5 hit points and 86 defense total.
Man, if I can interrupt you for just 1 second, I remember I played this game with one of the people who used to play, like one of the old guard people, and we'd done this siege at Edoras, and I had like Mithril Guard up on like that little hill at the top there, that little last stand area, you know?
Yeah.
And he shot directly into him with a ballista. He's just like, blocks it. And we're like, oh my god, what's happened? How did we get
that's
here?
A sign that things have gone too far. But like when people ask for the Elven King's Palace Guard to get their 5 hit points back, they really don't know what they're asking for. Like, I will say you're wrong. It's something that should never see the light of day again.
Mm-hmm. It was definitely very shocking. And to be fair, I mean, you can make a game around that. You can have like certain units be extremely powerful, and everything else kind of pales in comparison. They're just kind of there to, get in the way. And you can see that on display in Three Kingdoms in Warhammer 2, actually, now with all the new updates and stuff and the new lore and whatever. That's certainly something you can base things around. That's very like missile and hero focused, and infantry is just kind of there as like a little bit of a roadblock, and to pair against other like mostly chaff units. And certain things like the elite halberds, for example, are particularly useful because they pose a threat to large single entity monsters and things like that. So it can be a thing that you can do. It's just I don't know if that's necessarily the expectation that a lot of people have from Medieval 2.
Yeah, I don't think it blends very well with the slower paced nature of it. If you have one unit just mowing their way through hordes and hordes of units, like there's nothing. If it comes down to just like a pure melee brawl, you kind of know who's going to win at that point because you can throw everything you have at them, even surround them, and like your basic unit of like Orc Fodder, for example, with their stats were pretty much the same as they were back then.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be a unit of elves got like near 90 melee defense with 5 hit points.
Right. What's one of the things that you enjoy most about kind of where Third Age Reforged has come in the last few patches? Like, what's when you look back at things, and how they were, and then you look at where they are now. What's one of your favorite like features or changes that you think has really done the mod a great service?
Well, for me personally, stability, but I think that's more just a sort of something that affects me more
as a content creator. Yeah.
I think the one thing that I've always really liked about Reforged, to be honest, is the variety. There's a lot in the game now, and there's such a wide range of factions. There's such a lot of potential there, and I do feel as though that they're coming to the end of what they can add now with the limits in Reforged, and I think 2 factions is the most they're going to squeeze out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're going to be able to sort of fully flesh out Dunland. I think they'll always be like the dumping ground of sort of random bits and pieces from other factions. So I think Ered Luin and Dol Guldur would be the last that they would be able to do. But yeah, I think with each patch there's always been more variety added, and I think that's to its service because new stuff is always going to keep people interested, and tweaks, they do help, but ultimately like it's going to be sort of new stuff that keeps it going, which is one of the reasons why I like it when someone makes like a new map, and I always want to show that because of the work they put in, and also
right, because it's something, it's new and it's fresh and it's a product of like someone else's creativity. For a content creator, like having new stuff to show, I can understand that would be important for you, not just for your audience, but also like to prevent the ennui from setting in, and like the walls kind of closing in when you do Tirith for the 500th time.
Minas Tirith is soon.
Oh God, I'm so sorry.
It's all right. I haven't done Minas Tirith in quite a while. I think
always like 70,000 frame games.
Yeah, not so bad. Just like 50k and a bit. So, but yeah, Minas Tirith is one of those games that I think people would play more, but I think people that try it, they often have someone in the lobby that crashes the game before they get to the end because they often take so long.
Of course, that's usually how it goes. You're lucky if you get to the end of a Minas Tirith game, and with the lag, it ends up taking you like 4 or 5 hours of your life. So,
yeah,
can we have a moment of silence, perhaps, for the Minas Tirith players in Umad's upcoming video?
Yeah, I mean they got to the end, so
woo! No crashes or anything. We're not going to have
crashes.
The comment section.
No. There's no need to be concerned about that. No crashes at all.
What are your impressions so far on the legendary company system for Silmarillion Total War? Do you feel that it's just kind of like pointless fluff, or do you feel that those units actually have like a meaningful place both in like the mod as a whole and in the factions individually themselves?
No, I like it. I like it in multiplayer. I'm sure it'll be really good in single player as well, because it definitely fits in with like thematics and stuff like that. But I think in multiplayer it's good too, because of how different they are and how much more they offer. Like when I played the Philathrum, and I had the Mariners, I probably had oh, hang on a minute, my screen just went. Yeah, there we go. But yeah, when I had the Mariners, they helped me a lot more than I even realized, because they kept my line together for longer than it probably would have, just because of the morale buff, where the normal ones wouldn't. And yeah, I think adding that to all of the factions as well, it gives them a lot more depth, and that is part of the smaller rosters are there, but having an individual unit like that that's so different but still quite familiar, it offers you a little bit more scope to change your army around a little bit and base it around different things. So I think it's one of those areas that adds depth. I think the thing that I would say is you should only ever be seeing one. Like, if I would just make it so the cost was like 99999 for like a second unit of them, just so no one could try some scumbaggery by bringing like a bunch of stuff for some disgusting build.
Right. Oh, it is. It's like it's 5K after the first one, so the price goes up by 5,000, pretty well across the board. Is there now when I first started doing like Reforged replays like a million years ago? I think it's actually been like 3 years, because holy fuck, I'm old.
Tell me about it.
I was always very excited to show off new replays, and that does sort of diminish a little bit over time when things become kind of less new. Is there anything about Silmarillion Total War that when you get sent a replay, you're like, wow, this is really exciting? I'm interested in showing this off because this feature in particular really gets me going, or like a combination thereof?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, just something, it is new. It may be the same game and sort of the same aesthetics, because obviously it's still Lord of the Rings and it's still medieval too, but
new trees,
new trees, which does make a big difference. Actually, it does make the maps look a lot nicer, because medieval 2 trees, when you get past the draw distance, look really gnarly, like the regular ones. It's really apparent when you turn the graphics down to actually play the game, and they're like 2D and like following the camera around. It's really off-putting. But yeah, I think first and foremost, obviously, it's just having new stuff to show, completely new as well. Also, I think just seeing the first age aesthetics as well is quite nice. Like seeing the Balrogs like plow through a line, seeing like the elves of the first age sort of charge in. It's new enough compared to third age in terms of look as well, which I like. It's like different but familiar.
That's kind of what I was going for in a lot of ways. Like the Easterlings, for example, different but familiar, because they have like certain, I guess, like keynote looks to them that we've like reused from other mods and stuff, or from like third age and stuff.
I really like the Easterlings. Look, the Sons of Ulfang in particular are like really good.
Oh, I can thank Skyly for that. That was made like totally out of like whole cloth. Yeah.
Yeah, they look really, really good.
So in third age Reforged right now, there are certain things that are like very ubiquitous. For example, every faction has on average about 2.8 armor piercing missiles. Not every faction. Actually, every faction does have some kind of cavalry. Every faction in multiplayer can field up to 2 to 3 units of cavalry. 18 out of 25 have pikes. 18 out of 25 have rangers. 16 out of 25 have knights. So there are lots of things that are like very ubiquitous right now, and I know that the team is working on kind of addressing that to a certain extent. What would your sort of perfect Reforged look like in the next patch? Like, are you okay kind of with like a lot of factions sharing the same tools, or is it your preference that like there isn't so much overlap, and that certain things like rangers and knights, etc., get limited to very specific factions? What would your preference be as a player?
I think that's we'll link it back to balance afterwards, actually. But my preference would be to make them rarer, like certain tools be rarer, like, because when you think of rangers in particular, like the impact they have on the game, it would be more special if only certain factions could do that. Knights as well. Like knights they've always been like on an open field. Like knights will always be like the most important tool you can bring because of the mobility and control they can afford you. To have that be the problem is, as much as I would like it to be sort of rarer in certain factions to really specialize in certain areas, I do think that there would be balance issues if they do that, like ripping a band-aid off, because as soon as you take away a lot of factions access to knights and rangers in particular, but also other things, like I think javelins would be one of the things because they're fairly omnipresent in the game. If you started to take many factions access away from some of these tools, all of a sudden in certain situations they become much less viable and they will get rolled over by factions that do. So it's going to be a difficult balancing act for them. I would like to see them do it, but it would be a difficult balancing act for them to pull off.
I agree. I think that would necessitate some like pretty broad brush overhauls for a lot of factions. And this is, I feel like this is currently the case, but not so much because everyone has a lot of the same tools. But you would be creating some like, you'd be creating haves and have-nots basically. To use like a class metaphor, you'd be creating like the bourgeois classes that go on top, and then everyone else that doesn't have these powerful tools is like, unless something new is added, they're like the proletariat that sit under them and just get stomped on. I think that's a pretty valid concern, and that's something that I really tried to avoid in Silmarillion Total War. I didn't want to have, because I knew from the get-go that certain factions were going to have like those powerful tools that people were like very familiar with, but I also didn't want them to have them all at the same time. So there's no faction that has both a knight and a ranger and that kind of thing. So I think if moving forward, if that's what the team ends up deciding to do, I think that that's probably an important part of that, is making sure that yes, everyone has tools, and you want to have something unique, but you also don't have factions that combine a whole bunch of powerful tools in one, because I think that's how you end up creating you end up creating a monster essentially.
Part of the issue as well is every faction needs to have something unique, but also it needs to have something powerful. So a ranger and a knight, to give like two examples, they are very powerful. But if you give like heavily armored crossbows as well, like maybe like some really good javelins for anti-elephant, but as soon as you start, like I'm trying to think of a class of unit that maybe if you give it to them, they like, let's say like bodyguard, sword and shield infantry, like that's their showstopper unit, in quotes. Like they just won't be able to like give the same value as a ranger or a knight or a high tier javelin unit or something like that, because by their nature they're not as good. So it is difficult to give everyone something unique and it be useful and it all to be balanced. So I mean, if they do go that way, I would like it if they pulled it off, but I think that what would happen if they did that, there would be a patch where there would be some fairly substantial balance problems, and then they would probably fix it in the patch after. So that would be my prediction.
Yeah, I can definitely tell you that was certainly the case when we started playing Silmarillion. Even though Angband didn't have all of the stuff, they had enough that they were basically a steamroller and nobody could stop them. Death Eater is actually in the chat, and he was helping us out in the early days of that, so you can definitely attest to the fact that Angband, not Angmar, was a complete nightmare to try and face down. Like sometimes you could win maybe, but like the other person would have to just really screw up for that to happen. Oh god, I had a question in my head and now it just kind of flew out of there. Misery Cordy can also attest to that for sure.
Angband feels like, I do like playing as Angband because of how much muscle you have, like in the battles that I played. And there was actually a bit of that when I played against, I think when everyone else had left, I played a 1v1 with scouts on his stream. I was Angband and he was a Syrian, and I did just roll through them. It was very like one-sided, but I think there were reasons for that, and that was in an older build of the game. So, but yeah, I mean, Angband, I don't think Angband are OP. I don't think anything in Silmarillion is disgustingly overpowered, but then it's something that's also changing. So
you say this, but then you've never played against Artorias' 3 Pike Nargothrond build. It's a real nightmare.
Yeah, well, if he wants to sit in a square, that says more about him as a person.
Oh no, he runs at you with it. It's really frightening.
Oh,
I haven't figured out a way to stop it yet.
Good man.
God, what was I had a good question lined up and it just boom went right out of my head. What's currently your favorite faction in Reforged and Silmarillion, in whatever order?
Reforged is a difficult one. I think to play as, I've always been kind of fond of Rudour, because I've always been a bit of a micro, really fine micro is not really my forte. So being aggressive with a lower numbers faction doesn't really suit me. I like to have a bit more of a buffer, and Rudour have got plenty of numbers, but they've also got really nice damage dealing tools with javelins and axe throwers and all of that good stuff. So you can sort of pen someone in with a bunch of numbers and then start throwing all of your bits and pieces at them, and it tends to work out quite well. Not against everyone, because some it works better against armor, but they're a faction that I just like. I don't really know how to explain it. I just like playing as them. It tends to fit. And in Silmarillion, I'd say I haven't really played as the Philathrum or the East. I haven't played as the Easterlings at all, and I've only played the Philathrum once, so I can't pick either of them really. But I'd say of the ones I played, Angband. Honestly, I do like playing as Angband.
Really, I thought it was going to be Assyrian for some reason.
No, Assyrian, they're good, but I always feel like I need to take a shower after I play as these Wood Elf factions from any Total War game, because you always feel you always feel so bad, because the way you often win is you can feel the other person getting angry. The Wood Elves in Warhammer especially, they're just the ultimate expression of that.
Oh God, what does it say about me that the Wood Elves are one of my favorite factions in multiplayer?
Ooh, that's a controversial opinion.
It doesn't say anything good, I feel.
Well, it depends. If you go for the trees, then you're all right. But if you go for Way Watchers, we might have a problem.
Oh, Way Watchers and lots of Glade Riders with the Hagbane tips, and a few
Wild
Riders. And some Wild Riders mixed in there too. It's micro intensive, but god damn, is that a brutal build? It's a lot of armor piercing and mobility.
Yeah, but Assyrian are good. I obviously they're powerful at what they do.
It was the first faction I saw you play, actually.
Yes, it was. It was on the river battle. I was going to attack, and then my teammate, I think it was it Bobo?
It was definitely Bobo.
And he was like, no, we'll sit on this side of the river.
I've never let him forget it either.
And we'll do them in. And we did. But I deployed on the other side of the river, and I had to scramble quickly to go backwards because he deployed further back than I thought he would.
Mm-hmm. So there's we've talked a few things about what each mod has. What are some features that you think that they're missing that maybe you'd like to see in the future? So for Reforged or Silmarillion, that could be new units or new mechanics or certain focuses. What are some of the things that currently that they don't have that maybe they should?
It kind of depends, because I'm not sure what is and is not possible at the sharp end with Medieval 2. I'm surprised at how much they've actually been able to get out of the engine, to be honest with you. I think one thing that might be quite neat, but it's not something that I think has been in any Total War actually, it would be, I guess it's similar to Fatigue, but it would be sort of you would have certain units that could damage other units in the way maybe if you attack them, their armor goes down, or if you attack
armor sundering.
Yeah, armor sundering. I know that you can do that with morale, but fatigue sundering, as it were, sort of that. It'd be interesting to see if you could sort of add in additional effects like that, because that could suddenly open up a whole new way of playing. But I don't know if that's possible in Medieval 2. I know that they do it in Warhammer, but I don't know if it's possible in Medieval 2. It would be neat to see, because it would all of a sudden it would change the dynamic.
Yeah, I'm not sure at all if that's possible. I know that there has been kind of a breakthrough with EXE editing. but a lot of that, there are some things you can do that are compatible with Steam and other things that you can't do. So like there is the possibility of having a single entity unit without any of the necessary trickery that goes into it, like, you know, having a bunch of invisible units that surround it, and then you have the one visible thing in the unit. It is possible to do that, but you can't actually run it through Steam, which is the big kind of kicker, because that's
a bit of a problem.
That's where everyone plays their Medieval 2, and basically all of your Total War games are on Steam now. So not having that is obviously a big controversy. And a big hurdle for getting things done like that. Let's talk flying units. I know that's kind of one of the big places that Reforged and Silmarillion diverge. Is flying units. I'm personally not a fan of adding them in, but Reforged did recently add the Eagles, and you can definitely see them be, you know, destructive and effective. And I think they have some fairly clearly outlined weaknesses. What do you think on flying units as a whole? Do you think that maybe they're? Well, I won't lead you on in the question, but you can just tell me your thoughts.
Well, I think flying unit is maybe not. I mean, yeah, they're technically in the air, but it's a jury-rigged flying unit. Like they are technically on the ground with how the game sees it. Like if you try to fly them over impassable terrain like a river, they're not going to do it. Like, so it's. I like the fact that the Eagles are there in Reforged, because it gives like scenario creators something to work with potentially, and they are a useful unit in what they do, because they're fairly unique as well, to be fair, in the sense that they don't have melee attacks. The only thing they have is a really high charge.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the fact that they're there, but it's one of those things where they're doing the best with what they can manage in Medieval 2.
Right.
But like they'll never be like truly like in the same way that Warhammer has it, where you can like fly over stuff, and maybe that's a blessing in disguise, because flying units makes Warhammer, certain battles in Warhammer, very difficult to set up. But yeah, I'm neutral on them, I guess. And I guess would be the takeaway. Like I think I like the fact they're there because it offers some good thematic stuff, but they're not true flying units, so they don't like really offer that new thing in the game, because they are effectively just lancers in a disguise.
Right, and that was kind of my issue, and why I haven't really considered adding them, is because it's like a half step between, you know, cavalry and a true flying unit, and it's not, in my opinion, you know, accomplished particularly well. It's a little bit janky, and it's a little bit strange, and there are some oddities as well. Like if you fly them over stakes, they instantly die and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to add them basically for that reason, because, you know, we couldn't implement them up to a certain standard. So I didn't think it was the benefits outweighed the disadvantages of taking a unit like that. I think it ended up just being kind of weird. Which
everyone's
everyone's
gonna make the same mistake as well when they first use them. Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna fly over these pikes right into the archers, and nope.
Yeah, no, it's
going into the
pikes. And you know, maybe that doesn't sit well with people, just because, you know, the first stage is all about like big crazy monsters, and I do want to add more like big crazy stuff in the future, spiders, etc. But yeah, I think that flying units are probably just, I just don't feel that they fit. They're obviously not made for the engine, and there's some weird like mechanical things that they just can't seem to avoid, like running over stakes and instantly dying. So yeah, I decided not to do it.
No, yeah, I get that. It's definitely like a workaround version, but it's really just up to preference whether people like them or not. I'm fairly neutral on them. Like it's nice that someone was able to make something like that kind of work in Medieval 2's engine. It's one of those examples of where someone's done something that I didn't think was possible. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see if they can improve it in any way. But I kind of doubt it, considering Medieval 2's limitations. Like, they're doing very well just to get up to the point they've gotten to.
Right, yeah. And there's some other, like, kind of more sinister, like, kind of griefing possibilities there, where currently you can't attack flying units while they're in the air because of, you know, just the way that they work. In Warhammer, if you have a flying unit that's, you know, around and you have nothing on the ground, then that unit will lose morale over time, and eventually it will just rout off unless you touch down and stop that. I could definitely see someone salty with some flying units in game, just like endlessly flying them around, and someone who's like out of archers in the late game or out of
war of attrition. Yeah, I get
it. They just sit there and waste your time for an hour. I could see that being an issue as well.
Yeah, that's gonna if there's griefing possible in any game, though, you could get someone doing that.
One thing I've learned is that if it can be exploited, it will absolutely be exploited once people get their hands on it.
Oh yeah.
So you've done a lot of replays over the last little while, especially, since the quarantine thing. And I'm sure a lot of people are, just absolutely thrilled about that because it's, it's entertainment and it kind of helps keep them level and like gives them like a schedule and something to look forward to every day. What's your favorite multiplayer match that you've been sent so far? Like, is there any, like, when you think back on it, maybe there's 2 or 3 that really stand out?
Ooh, there's quite a few to choose from there. I mean, it's going to be like one of the scenarios, I would suggest, because they're often like crafted in such a way that they make an easier watch rather than a game that's just sort of set up. God, that's quite the question.
Any particular scenario that stands out? It's a big question.
How far back are we going?
As far back as you want to. It's up to you, man.
There was a good one that Bobo sent me, like near the start of when I started making stuff on a more regular basis. Mm-hmm. That was sort of like, it was like a series of hills, dwarves on the defense, sort of like farmland, and then like orcs and goblins coming out of the trees towards this sort of varied hill terrain.
Mm-hmm.
That was a good one. It's probably one of the most viewed as well, I think.
Well, that's a real old one then.
Yeah.
Back in the early days.
Back in the dark ages.
when we were all young and naive.
When there was like 30 of us total.
Okay. We've talked a good bit about like Third Age and stuff like that. Let's what are your thoughts on some of the more like recent, I suppose, YouTube developments? I know that in particular, as regards Total War, Pixelated Apollo has decided to walk away from the series. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that, and like maybe some of the directions that Creative Assembly has decided to go with their newer games? Do you maybe kind of echo some of his thoughts, or are you just diametrically opposed?
Yeah, I watched that video, and I've always quite liked Apollo, obviously, but I respect him a lot more after that video, to be honest. I think he's got a big channel, and it's his source of income. Like for you or me, like if YouTube decided, you know what, we're just going to get rid of you on the sly, it would suck, but ultimately it wouldn't ruin our lives.
Right.
But like for him, it's his job, and Total War is a big part of that. And for him to willingly take what is going to be a financial hit for his own sense of, because he wants, it's obviously his personal preferences, his enjoyment, and his his preferences. Like I respect that quite a lot, to be honest with you. And I think
I'm in the same camp as you. I think I watched it and I felt that it could have benefited from some notes and some structure and stuff like that.
No, I'm with him on that. I don't take notes. I just go in.
You just go right in for it.
I'm unprofessional.
But whether or not I wholly agree with all of his takes on Total War, like for example, if you buy Warhammer 2, one of the things that he brought up is that you should also get Warhammer 1 as like part of a package. You should just be able to buy them all together. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do think that they need to start bundling their DLC a little bit because it's becoming hideously expensive and bloated. But that completely aside, the fact that he's willing to walk away from the thing that made him famous in the first place, which is inevitably going to impact him and his livelihood. There's no two ways about that. Most of the people seem to be sticking around, and like I looked at his channel just the other day, and it doesn't seem like he'd really lost a ton of viewership over it. In fact, I think he's been sitting at 28K since that came out. So he's probably gained subs and lost some. But like I think that's a fairly gutsy move to take, and to move off of the platform, go onto Twitch. Like that's obviously a big risk, and it sounds like he's doing it because that's something that he genuinely believes in. So whether or not you agree with every point that he's made, I still appreciate the quality of his convictions and his willingness to do that. So yeah,
so do I.
I honestly, I'm gonna go. I don't really watch his content all that much anymore, but I will go and I will purchase a premium Twitch membership just so I can support this guy, because I think that more people should do that. I think that that's really important to be able to like. He's not the biggest YouTuber in the world, but like being willing to kind of take that stand is, I think, something that I wish more people would do.
Yeah, I agree, and I can see why as well, because it's clear that he came from obviously like the Medieval 2 stuff like we did, and it's fairly clear to me that CA is not going back to that. So I mean, if that's what he was here for, there's nothing really keeping him around.
Agreed. Yeah, there's a lot that we could talk about there. Do we want to get into that? Do we want to like broach that mighty beast? We might get our hand bitten off, but
I think it's fine. I would be I'd be willing to talk about it.
Let's talk here about Calvin Van Zyl. It would seem the Total War community in general has become toxic. Any ideas how or why this happened? If I'm being totally honest, I don't think that it has ever not been toxic in a lot of ways. I don't know if you spend a lot of time on the Reddit, Calvin Van Zyl, but there's problematic stuff on both sides. Like it goes through these cycles, right? So people are pissed and Creative Assembly can do nothing right. And then on the other side of that is Creative Assembly is the golden goose and they can do no wrong. And if you get caught in the middle of that, you just get shouted down big time.
If you go to a place like Reddit and Twitter, you're not going to be coming away with positive vibes.
There's a lot of brigading, and that's just something that I think you can level at the internet in general. But specifically vis-a-vis the Total War community, I think that's always been a thing. It just rears its head at certain times. But yeah, I think that the CA has kind of gone away from their base a little bit, which is always painful. It's always like a growing pain that a lot of companies go through if they try to like take a different creative direction.
Been rewarded for it though.
They are certainly rewarded for it, and there are things that I think that they should be rewarded for, and there are other things that maybe not so much. I feel that they've kind of stagnated a little bit in terms of innovation. So let's bring out Total War Troy, and then you can tell me kind of what you think on what we think are. We're not going to talk about the epic stuff. I've already got a podcast out. If you guys want to go and look at that, that's totally cool. But specifically as regards some of the new unit mechanics, they're frankly not that interesting, and a lot of them are canceled out by the fact that there's so many like powerful elite units that have anti-flanking, for example, so you can't do anything to them no matter what angle you hit them from. There's stuff like that. It's not interesting and it's not super innovative. It's just like, oh hey, this unit moves faster and is light infantry. This unit does it's slower and it's heavy. It's not super interesting, and a lot of the stuff has been done before and done better.
Yeah, I think they know that as well, which is it was all pointing to it not being very successful at all, and that's why things have worked out the way they have. I think it's been a bit of a fumble in most senses, to be honest. It looks worse than the games that came before it. There's not really anything brand new. Like most of the mechanics that are in there have been in one or more past Total War games, whether they've been in recent ones or not. And it feels like there's been a bit of a clash of design decisions. Like the fact that they put some effort into stuff like that, but then there's also these like big hero units from Three Kingdoms and Warhammer in there as well. Something isn't quite right there. Like they've clearly like just bodged something together, and now I think they want to be rid of it, to be honest with you. That's why it's all gone the way it has.
Right, yeah. And I think that a lot of people have that sense, like as soon as like the day before we even had any reason to like be really, really concerned, like the day that the announcement came out that they were switching over to the Epic Store as an exclusive, they're like, oh, they don't believe in this game, it's gonna be a flop. But the more that we see, and like the lack of like really like quality marketing pushes, like what they normally have, it just doesn't seem like they're willing to invest a lot in the game, which is certainly a concern for a lot of people. It like gets their hackles up immediately about whether or not this game is actually worth their time.
Yeah, and I would say probably not, based on what I've seen. Like I won't be bothering with it, to be honest with you, because like it just doesn't look like my sort of thing, to be honest.
Yeah, but like mechanically as well, not just like sort of perceptually. But mechanically, there's a lot of things that have kind of disappeared. Naval battles, I know, were a big thing for a lot of people, and I think a lot of people were expecting that going into Warhammer 2 because one of the premier factions was the High Elves, and they are an island nation. They are a naval superpower.
Wasn't that something to do with the rights with Games Workshop though? Or was
no,
that not true?
That's not true. That was just a rumor, basically.
Right.
And CA even came out and said, no, that's not why we're doing it. We're just not doing it because we don't think people play the naval battles enough. Which, statistically, I believe them when they say that 0.5% or whatever that it happened to be of their battles of their naval battles were actually played, or like if their total overall battles were naval battles. I believe them, but I think that doesn't necessarily mean that you throw out the concept.
Get rid of them completely, yeah.
Right. It's just maybe just make them better, make them more interesting. Some of the naval battles were clunky and buggy, and they just weren't very good. But they did add a lot to like amphibious assaults on cities, for example. So I think maybe it just need to be better implemented.
Well, yeah, naval battles like Shogun 2 is a pretty good example where like you would only play the early naval battles because later on the balance of power would be so much in your favor, and naval battles took quite a while. Even if you had overwhelming force, you just auto-resolve it. And early naval battles where you've got like one Boca Boyer against another one, not really like the heart-stopping action that people really want. So, yeah, I mean, improvements were necessary, not just gutting it completely.
Yeah.
But that's a problem that more than CA suffer with.
That's very true. But let's take a look at chat here just for a second. So Windy Pops said that Warhammer's campaign is one of the most enjoyable experience I've had in a Total War, but each individual battle is just repetitive and draining. I can kind of see where he's coming from on the battle perspective. I find that they do get a little bit tedious, but I'm curious, Windy, what is it that you find the most enjoyable about the campaign experience? Because for me, the most fun I've had in a campaign, and maybe I'm just like a Total War boomer or something, but when I did my Cardolan campaign just yesterday, like that was probably the most fun I think I've had in a while in a campaign, which is very surprising. So like, what is it about Total War Warhammer 2 that like really kind of gets your juices flowing? I think that's an interesting,
especially now. I think Warhammer benefits from all of the different races having very different mechanics. Some of them are not so great, but quite a few of them are pretty good, and it gives you different ways to play.
Mm-hmm.
Like Chaos and Beastman, no, but everyone else.
Wood Elf Amber. Ugh.
Yeah, but like they were always going to struggle a bit with the Wood Elves, weren't they? Because like they're meant to stay in their trees, but the whole point of Total War is that you sort of spread your wings a little bit. Like playing tall in Total War is difficult because you need more land to finance your building. So it was always going to be fairly tough for them to do the Wood Elves, I think.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully they get a bit of a boost soon, because goddamn, that campaign is painful. Amber is just an awful mechanic.
Yeah, the Greenskins got love in the most recent one, didn't they? Which they needed as well, to be honest with you.
They got some love, but they kind of suffer from the problem that's pretty widespread in some of CA's more recent DLCs, in that the power creep was real. Like you could get goblins, like just regular goblin units, up to like 80 or something, like melee defense, and like 70 melee attack. Like they're elite, basically elite units that eclipsed a lot of the high tier units from other factions because of the amount of like buffs that you could give them through Ground Ponch's Cauldron and like scrap upgrades and so forth.
The lads are now properly ready.
Oh, they were properly ready, and they were a little bit, I don't want to say broken, but CA definitely went back and toned them down. And there's a lot of YouTubers that I follow that were like, hang on a minute, something's not right here. And yeah, they got a buff, but a lot of CA's newer DLCs tend to, there's a lot of power creep there, and it's noticeable, and people have taken note.
Yeah, I get that. But yeah, I mean, Warhammer is definitely the I like Warhammer as far as new CA games go. I had fun with the first couple of campaigns that I did in Three Kingdoms, but that was more of a short-lived thing. But yeah, I've got no interest in Troy.
Yeah, I'm not hugely interested in Troy, and I'm not gonna get it just based on principle. And I outlined that in my my podcast on the subject, so that's available for everyone. Oh, hi WK. Have a question here from Siddhartha. Everybody, it was Jazz Deep. Give me a second here. Yes, it was Siddharth. He wants to know if either of us have any plans on playing AAA titles anytime soon.
Like new ones?
Yeah, like new ones.
New AAA games.
Or The Witcher. Witcher was brought up as well.
The Witcher. I've played all 3 of the Witcher games, so I don't know if I'll replay it anytime soon. Yeah, I mean they're good. I was thinking of picking up Metro Exodus in the Steam sale, if that counts.
Ooh.
Because I played the first 2 and enjoyed them.
Last of Us 2 playthrough? Do you want to step into the middle of The Last of Us with all the controversies swirling around?
I don't know if well, for a start, I don't have a PS4, so I can kind of dodge that bullet. But yeah, not really my sort of thing. I don't think. That's a whole different thing. I mean, we can talk about Last of Us 2 if you want, but that's. I don't know if I have anything to add in there.
I don't
really know enough about it either. But I know about some of the things that are around it, and it, all in all, it doesn't sound like a fun time.
Yeah, it sounds interesting, and it's been a really long time since I played the first one, and I quite enjoyed the first one. And Troy Baker is just an immensely handsome man, so I'm willing to get behind anything that he's in. But no, I don't really have any interest in playing that one. DCI is a really good point here. I've been thinking about covering DCI. I haven't yet, and I've heard some interesting kind of feedback on it. Have you had a chance to play it, Umed?
What's DCI?
Oh, it's I don't even remember what it stands for anymore. I think it's like Dunedain Crusade something, but it's become like its own title, sort of like SFO. It's just like a title. It doesn't necessarily stand for anything anymore.
Oh, I think, yeah. I vaguely know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's like the Second Age set mod. I've been waiting for that game since I was like in my early 20s. Like it's been some time. And it's had a bit of a lukewarm reception so far. I know that some of the modders that I've talked to have been a little bit disappointed in terms of how a lot of the models look, especially given that it's been 10 years in the making. For some people, it's been a little bit disappointing. And I've also heard that the balance in it is a little bit askew. So far, their team stands behind what they've done, which is great for them. But there's been some mixed reception to it so far.
Well, I mean, I can have a look at it and see what's going on. But it's the sort of thing that I've seen like once or twice, and then it sort of disappears into nothingness. But if it's out, then it's not a lot of fanfare, I guess, if I didn't hear of it.
It's in beta essentially. Like they've said that it's a beta,
right?
But it's a quote unquote beta. They'll be updating it, but like this is kind of close to where they want it to be. They've certainly had 10 years to get to that point. So
I see. Well, we'll see on that one. I'll have to have a look.
Yeah, I'm thinking I might stream a little bit of it, and you certainly have that option too. But yeah, it's out. It's just it seems like it's having some issues.
I see. Doesn't seem like there's many releases that have not got issues.
WK says, take that one time when someone makes evil factions OP instead of elves and everyone calls it bad balance. That's fair, yeah. I guess.
Sometimes they don't even need to be rebalanced. Sometimes it will just be evil wins. And that's it. It's about to go down.
But let's kind of return to Reforged and Silmarillion and metas and stuff like that. I think we have some of the developers from Reforged in the comments now, so we can probably return to that a little bit. And they can chime in and tell us, a little bit about kind of where things are. So WK, I know that you've been involved in development for quite some time. What do you think is probably one of the biggest challenges facing Reforged right now? Be that in multiplayer. Well, I know campaign has a lot of bugs to be worked out, so we'll steer clear of that because that's still very much a work in progress. But multiplayer has been worked on for a really long time. What's your impression of it? What do you think is maybe some of the weaker and some of the stronger aspects of it?
Speaking of WK, one thing I've always noticed with maps is people put a lot of effort into like new maps where there's like all sorts of different features, like whether it's just like a map that's like got a city in it, like a siege, or whether it's more of an open one. People always put a lot of effort into them. And it always makes me feel a little bit sad in a way that for most of these maps, it often boils down to like 2 or 3 choke points. in many cases, where there's like loads of like interesting stuff that could be used, but very often it doesn't, because the map is based around like these set points of defenses and that's it.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that in some of the community maps. They can be very choke pointy. And one of the other challenges, this comes from like personal experience, is you go through the effort of like, you know, adding all of this stuff, adding all this ambient things, and then everything tends to happen in the middle of the map. So like in that sort of gray area between, you know, where you start and where your opponents start, there's that little like, you know, DMZ. That's where everything ends up kind of happening, and that's where everyone pays attention. So everything else that you like put on the map ends up, for one reason or another, getting kind of forgotten, which is it's a real shame, because there's, like you said, there's a ton of effort and thought that goes into that. I think that's just sort of like a reality of like, I was reading some articles in game design, and there is a term for this basically, which I can't remember, but there are certain areas where players in action tend to gravitate towards. So I think for anybody who's out there who's like, I really want to make maps, I really want to make some like interesting, you know, maps, and I want to make it like immersive, and I want it to be sort of, there to be these ambient features that help draw you into the setting. You also really have to pay attention, maybe focus more of your effort on the areas where it's likely that people are going to congregate and where action is going to happen. You can actually funnel people into certain areas, as you can with like choke points and whatever. But that's something that I think is necessary for people to pay attention to, and then maybe focus their efforts a little bit more on those like those really hotspot areas.
Beware of using bridges.
Beware of using bridges. Yes, they can be buggy, and also they're very choky.
In the infamous replay, as it will be known henceforth, me and Blindness were basically spent most of the first third of the match trying to navigate this one bridge. We were trying to fight one another, but we were also trying to get across this bridge, and it was an experience.
So WK, let's see here. I started with some of the weaker aspects. I think we touched on this a little bit, is variation and uniqueness. So variation is like simultaneously a strength of Reforged, in that it, you know, it helps people, you know, jump in and be interested and that sort of thing. But there's also kind of a lack of, for some factions, there's definitely a lack of uniqueness. Now there are certain areas that, you know, maybe they start to pull away from each other, but again, there's like this baseline of unit types. So like 18 out of 25 factions, you know, having pikes, everyone having missiles. Every single faction, including the dwarves, are able to field, you know, 2 to 3 units of cavalry base. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point, and they're trying to get to that a little bit by reworking Rangers. But
interested to see how they manage that, because I think Rangers have sort of become embedded in the meta at this point. And it is a way actually that they have, because one thing that was noticeable before Rangers was attackers did win sieges more often than they do now, because, you know, Rangers by their very nature are so good when you get them into, which is ironic when you consider what Rangers actually are. They're supposed to be sort of out in the field and skulking around and sort of hunting things down, but they're at their strongest when they're sort of in like a sort of grindy siege within like a town.
And I'll be interested to see kind of how that changes up the way that people like play and approach sieges and even field battles in some way, because there are a lot of like checks on player behavior. Rangers and Witchers and things like that are one of them. Those are units that can like force you out of a defensive position or turn a defensive position into a graveyard for your army really, really quickly. And there are a couple of the units that can like almost single-handedly, less so Rangers because they can't do it as quickly, but Witchers certainly, they can cause disasters really quickly, and they can like wipe out, you know, significant portions and important parts of your army.
I think that's what makes them so controversial.
That makes them controversial, and I think it makes people play a little bit more conservatively. And certainly there's a lot more like, you'll send in chaff and everything in order to like eat up ammunition and to try and like maybe catch these units out and to buy time for yourself to you know, avoid facing them or maybe even destroy them. So we could end up seeing like the whole super heavy push meta come back, where like everyone just overloads, you know, one part of the line and then just like click moves through an enemy formation in order to like break it up. So we could see that make a return.
Maybe we should throw that out to public opinion. Do you prefer the big heavy push, or do you prefer the Witchers? You must choose one. You cannot choose neither. Only one.
And you know what? Maybe nothing will happen. I mean, we don't have Witchers, and we only have one Ranger unit in Silmarillion, and people don't usually do that sort of thing. So, who knows?
No, I suppose the it's more difficult to do in Silmarillion though, because there's less. You can still push, but you can't like rely on like a smaller section of the army to do it. Like one unit Blackguard followed up by some trolls. Like you'd have to do it more with more of your army, so there's more of a risk.
Right, and you have to do it pretty well specifically with spearmen. Let's see here. There's a few people that aren't the Uruloki basically Witchers. No, they were never like Witchers.
No, they don't lay down near as much punishment as them.
The big difference between them and Witchers is there's two actually. One, their base damage value isn't super high the way that the Witchers are, and it's not armor piercing. So things with shields and things with heavy armor will stand up to it. They won't even notice it. They'll get knocked over, but most of the time they'll be fine unless they get shot from behind or something like that. Whereas light units or units that are unshielded with like light or medium armor get cooked by it. So there's like counterplay there, and there's like very specific, well-defined weaknesses. But Windy was saying that when he first started, he had a burning hatred for Witchers. Pun intended. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
They are a cool part of the game. I'm very glad about the drop in their ammo, though.
Yeah, and they are, to be fair to the Witchers, they are easy to counter. Like they will get destroyed by sustained archer fire very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're playing correctly, you could argue that you shouldn't be hit by the Witchers at all. Maybe once.
And in like the field, you can catch them out with cavalry, and then they'll die really quickly.
Yeah.
But
you rarely see them on the field, to be honest.
In attacking sieges, especially if you have more than one Angmar player, two sets of Witchers can, if people are smart and conservative with them, it can almost be insurmountable.
You could say that if, like, say you've got like 5 Angmar armies and each one brings a Witcher, though, at that point, like you're spending an awful lot of your team's shared pool on just Witchers. So if you can, as the defenders, deal with just the Witchers, a lot of the rest will take care of itself, really. So it's risky in a way.
Mm-hmm. Well, Angmar has a lot going for them outside of Witchers. Even if they lost them, they still have a chance. But
Blackguard, terrific infantry. Hammerguard, very dangerous. Guardians of Kharn, really, really good front line.
Yeah, they have a lot going for them. But now for the real question. Are you ready for this? Because this is super controversial.
This is the big one.
This might end your career.
Really? I'm ready for it. My career was never important to me.
Where do you stand on the topic of grassy plains in a competitive game? What do you think?
Oh man, grassy plains, my old friend.
Oh yes, the real juicy stuff here.
I think I understand why people like playing on grassy plain, because it is a complete neutral venue. Like no one gets any advantage over the other. Except that's not really true, I don't think, because
I was going to say I have a big issue with that.
Yeah, certain factions will suit grassy plain much more than others, just by the nature of their faction focuses and whatever. Like generally speaking, on grassy plain, you'll see like one of two things. You'll see either people refusing to move towards one another and skirmishing with each other and trying to get around the sides with the odd unit of cavalry, or you'll see an all-out rush from one side or the other, or both.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like I distinctly remember like this was a problem in like tournament battles back in the day. And I distinctly remember watching one on Twitch, and I was like, yeah, this is like the tournament semi-final. I'll go and have a little watch, because I said, nah, tournaments aren't really my thing. I think I'll give this one a miss. But I'll watch it, and I was completely vindicated in not playing in the tournament, because it was a 2v2 tournament, and it took over an hour for this game to be over, because they kept shuffling around. They weren't moving in. No one could really gain any sort of advantage because of the neutrality of the map.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also dull. Let's be honest. Like it's boring to look at. It's very plain, but I can understand why it exists, and I think it has value being there, especially from a testing perspective.
I don't know if you've looked at the chat here, but you've caused quite the controversy. So WK says dislike, unsubscribe, block, and coming for your head.
Bring it on.
You wrote this answer before even hearing what you had to say, though.
Yep.
Are you ready? Are you ready for a hot take here that I'm sure is really going to get chat going, or it won't? They just don't care. They already know how I feel about this.
Give it to me.
I don't think that Grassy Plains is neutral at all. I think, like any other map in the game, it favors certain factions and certain builds over others, specifically those with a lot of mobility. Specifically those that can stack a good amount of missiles, because it's just really.
Yeah, I agree.
That
feeds back into the one of two ways I said you could play on it. Really, it's
flat area.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of people out there, and most of the people that I have seen who have been like, oh, I freaking love it. They like to play with cavalry in particular. So I don't think that it's actually true. I think everything that people think they know about Grassy Plains is actually a little bit of a lie. That we've continued to tell ourselves so long that we forget that
we've been living a lie for when did Medieval 2 come out? 2006. So like 14 years.
Well, I just saw some people. Some people just left the video. I've offended some people.
Oh man, it's all over.
But I think that it's very possible to have a good competitive map, and I think that there's a lot of games out there that show us that you can have competitive maps with a little bit of asymmetry on them and have them be really, really strong. And I think probably Dota is probably one of the best examples of that, because there's a ton of asymmetry on that map. And it's an entire game that's based around that, and it's been super popular and well played for a really long time. So I think that it's very true. That's something that I'm trying to explore a little bit in like map making. So I recently made the War-Torn Plains map, and I released that to even people who really like Grassy Plains. Finrod is out there, I'm sure. Yes, Windy, I've wanted to do that for so long, and now I have the tools to do so, so it's entirely possible that I will make a Dota map for Reforged. But I've been wanting to experiment with that, and people who liked Grassy Plains really like the War-Torn Plains map as well. So I think that even some of the more hardcore people, like there was a tournament recently with the arena map, are starting to kind of see that there's more that we can do beyond Grassy Plains, and that Grassy Plains isn't actually this like utopia for neutrality that we all kind of believe it is. Like anything else, it's got certain advantages inherent to it, and just because you don't have massive hills doesn't mean that there isn't an advantage there.
When I showed battles on the arena map, I was like, you could almost look at this as being like a replacement for the Grassy Plain, and Kuro was like, maybe not, but I'm like, no, yes, this is correct, this is what we should be doing. Because you can still have those. There is still that dynamic. It's still open. There's still lots of space to move around in, but it's not just flat and nothingness. There is elevation. There is trees that you can hide in. There's cover that you can take. There's different elevations over different parts of the map, even minor ones. It works. Trust me.
Yeah, it really does. And I think that people are slowly maybe waking up to that fact. There's definitely a lot of pushback, and some of it I think is just like memes. But I think that you can have really good competitive games and really interesting to watch competitive games that like allow for a lot of replayability without just having it be flat and boring and have nothing there. I don't know. I take issue with the fact that you can, have a map with literally nothing on it, and you're like, voila, it's totally perfectly balanced. And it doesn't seem like there's been a ton of thought that's been put into that statement, to be perfect. Because, just having nothing and having no features doesn't mean that something is like good or balanced. It just means that you don't have anything interesting that's going on there.
The people who like Grassy Plain are the people that only order plain pizza.
They like a lot of cheese pizza. Hello, yes, I'd like a large triple cheese pizza with extra cheese.
Like less of that.
It's fine. Know what you like. That's important, and know what you like and support that. But I think that it is possible to meet the requirements of balanced competitive multiplayer map without having nothing on it.
Dry Lake Bed is a good example. It's it's still relatively plain, but it has stuff on it. Like there's little like canyony bits. There is elevation on like both sides to varying extents. There you go. Yeah,
and like just to go back to the War-Torn Plains map. So everything is centered around like a focus like center point. So like all of the stuff is in the center, and that's where people tend to gravitate towards. And then whatever happens out on the wings, whatever happens, and there's a little bit of terrain out there, but most of the stuff happens in the center. And like there's different terrain, there's the possibility for ambush and to activate like certain units that have like terrain bonuses and stuff like that, and you don't get like big parts of the game when you play on a map with no visual obstructions. So like people are always looking around, they can see everything you're doing at all times. There's no possibility for like an ambush or like a surprise attack because nothing's obscured by canopy. And then again, there's no terrain bonuses there, which can, for at least in Silmarillion, there are certain units that become really viable in certain kinds of terrain, and they're less so outside of that. So
yeah, I'd agree. I like the War-Torn Plains map as well. That was the one we played, wasn't it? On a few days ago when I was the Philathrum and you were Sauron's minions.
Right, and we had a good game there.
Yeah, and we brought two very different armies, two very different ways of going about it. It was very close.
Yeah, and you had
everything you'd want.
You had a ton of spears that were problematic for my cavalry, but like I was kind of able to sneak some stuff in with like being able to hide them, which I would not have been able to do otherwise, which totally changes up my strategy. And I might not have even brought that comp or that faction at all to begin with. Like it just makes things viable.
There's no way I would have gone with no cavalry on a map that was like the grassy plains, because it just wouldn't have worked.
Exactly, and again, that's grassy plain. That's the favoring of cavalry and mobility and missiles that comes out right there in that decision, because if you're playing on grassy, you're going to need some cavalry. Whereas different maps with different terrain features, they open up new possibilities for builds and diversity, and I think it's just good for the game in the long run when you don't base all your decision making around grassy plains.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think the grassy plain, it still should be there, but it shouldn't be like the center of the universe for me.
I agree, and I try not to make it the center of the universe for myself either. I try not to base any of my decisions around one map. And I try not to make too broad sweeping like statements about this map is for only for competitive play and this is for something else, because that's just setting up like boundaries and arbitrary lines that I don't think necessarily need to exist.
Yep.
Let's take a look at chat here, because I wonder if that's caused a bit of a stir. Yeah, there are some people that disagree, and that's totally cool. Alex wants me to show you some compositions. I'll try to. I'll try to get those going. Let's remove field battles and only support siege maps. That's what people seem to want.
Yeah, that's the way forward. We're gonna only have one type of battle. Just river crossings, nothing else.
Nothing but river crossings and sieges.
Yeah.
People
just
like
a map with the river through the middle and one way across.
That's what gets the views, man.
Man, at least it doesn't crash the game now when I go vaguely near it when archers are shooting in, causing blood to spray everywhere. You could see the game have a heart attack in old versions of Reforged when the Rangers were shooting in. It was like, no, please, have mercy on me.
I was happy that they removed that.
Oh yeah.
Well, apparently no Witchers are causing some issues for you.
A couple of times, yeah. I think in those two instances, it was more unlucky that I turned the camera around to see the green fire streaking towards me, and I was at ground zero, and the game was like, nope. On both occasions, back to back. But we'll see. As long as I'm alert, that shouldn't happen.
Here's another big controversy for you. I know we're talking about Pixelated Apollo leaving and Troy and all this stuff. It's just on fire today. What are your thoughts on more team focused dynamics as opposed to 1v1s on inevitably grassy plain? That's one of the big distinctions I think that exists between the two mods, and that's a big preference that I think exists between people who play both. Maybe they're looking for one experience over the other. And Silmarillion, I tried to make things a little bit more team focused. So Tolian Gaudhoth, for example, is not exactly an amazing 1v1 faction. They can win 1v1, but it's pretty rough. But they definitely shine in terms of supporting other people. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have a preference? Do you think that one is over the other?
I do prefer the the team-based approach because it's where I've spent most of my time. Like I don't do, like, generally speaking, I don't do very many 1v1s at all because people are just less interested in them.
Mm-hmm.
So naturally, I'm going to gravitate towards more team-focused things. So yeah, that would be my personal preference. I think it's easier to balance that way as well, because it allows, if you make it so that people are, like, factions are good in certain situations, it allows people to be a bit more creative when forming their team battles. Obviously, if you do it that way, then in 1v1 situations and like tournaments, and if you go up against certain other people, there are going to be factions which are just going to be objectively better. But to be honest with you, I think that's the case anyway.
I think that's certainly a danger, but I think one of my very strong disagreements when I was working on the Third Age Reforged team was trying to get things to be a little bit more team focused, because in my opinion, 1v1s on one map that does privilege certain playstyles over another is not really a great way to foster sort of like diversity in and replayability and stuff like that. And we touched on that a little bit earlier, I think, when we talked about how there's, and WK mentioned this as well, there's a lot of variation in Reforged, but there is also a lot of like sameness, I guess. So my wanting to push that forward was a really big disagreement. And I'm not saying, who's wrong, who's right, whatever. I think it does come down in a lot of ways to personal preference. But for me, encouraging diversity isn't just something that you can do just by adding variation and by adding a whole bunch of different stuff all at once. I think probably one of the most important things is to have very defined strengths and weaknesses, and that inevitably leads to certain factions, having difficulty in certain matchups if you're playing in solely 1v1s on one kind of map. So building things around teams, and even building them around like interesting maps with interesting features. So we talked a little bit earlier about, when we played on war-torn plains. If you're playing on grassy, you said you would have brought cavalry. On war-torn, you don't necessarily have to do that. You have the ability to kind of diversify a little bit. You don't necessarily have to play the same way. So again, that's diversity of builds and play and how you're going to approach things. So I think that the two in tandem there, like the more diversity focused approach in terms of maps and in terms of your factions, and not necessarily trying to have everything be 1v1 on one map, does make things more interesting and more replayable in the long run. And that's probably my biggest criticism so far, is that there's like a lot of things. I do like 33 Reforged. Obviously, I do. I wouldn't be playing it, but I feel I need to get that out there. But I think one of the biggest problems is that, again, 18 out of 25 factions have pikes. They can all field cavalry, up to 2 to 3 units of them. There's armor-piercing missiles on average. Every faction has 2.8. There's a lot of sameness, and I think that that's something that can definitely be improved in the future. And that's why I don't do things the way that they do.
Well, if the intention is to make Reforged have that sort of reduce the abundance of some of these units, that is something they will have to look at ultimately.
And it seems like that's what they're actually doing now anyway. So maybe we're more on the same page there than we used to be.
And I think, like my preference is team stuff, because it's what, I do. Like, 1v1s are not as popular, so I'm going to be biased in that regard. But I think that the spectacle of like team battles and having more players involved is just more fun anyway.
We have Muffins in the chat there. Bring Conquest game mode back. You know what? It's a shame that Conquest never really caught on, and I'm certainly happy to play Conquest games with people in the future. I think it's like Warhammer, or not Warhammer, but it's like a tabletop game that's been brought to Total War, and I think it's actually kind of cool. And it does like encourage you to kind of coordinate with your teammates and figure out what everyone is going to bring. So yeah, I think that's pretty neat.
If nothing else, the maps that were made for it were pretty good for the most part. Lots of good stuff in there.
Yeah, maybe we'll bring Conquest mode back. I've certainly carried over some of the Conquest maps because I really like them and I worked really hard on them. And some of those maps, actually, they don't fall into the trap of and this is why I quite like them. There's that one village map. The one I mean? It's like in a canyon, but there's a river that runs down the center.
Yeah.
There's like 2 settlements on either side. The Blood Gulch map.
It doesn't. The one I brought a full Fëanor cavalry army one.
Yes, I remember this one. It doesn't fall into the trap of like everyone going into the middle, because there is no middle. It's cut in half vertically by a river. So I think that was probably one of my better ideas. So yeah, maybe we'll bring that back. Yeah, WK thinks the Force is a greater area of the map to be used, for sure. I do agree there, and obviously that's important for me. And not everyone's going to agree with that. No, let's ask chat their thoughts on that. You know, what do you guys prefer as an approach? Maybe you prefer both. Maybe you like them both for different reasons. What are your thoughts there? But while we wait for that, we can talk a little bit more about. Let's talk a little bit about your channel. I know that you have a lot coming on, and I know that there's an update video, so you don't have to tell me everything. But are you like kind of where are you at? Where's the channel at? Do you think that we're gonna see you stick around for quite some time, or?
Yeah, like the idea is to keep it rolling along, like maybe not to quite the same extent as it is at the moment, because obviously with quarantine I've had more time even than I would normally have had. But where it is really, like the information is going to be in I think the update's going to come out Sunday, maybe Sunday. Yeah, Sunday. And yeah, really it boils down to the fact that I think anyway, like there's still the possibility that I do finish in September, but I think that the finish date for my Masters is going to be pushed back to early February in 2021. So basically it means I can continue more or less as I am for a little bit longer. After that, though, I run into effectively the same situation as Windy, where he's away for blocks of time, like at once, where I won't be able to do anything for certain blocks of time. So I'll have to record in advance in order to keep things going, which obviously means I won't be able to do one video every 2 days. It'll be more like 2 to 1 potentially videos a week, depending on how long I'm gone for. But yeah, that's like the longer term stuff. But also with streaming, it means that I can be a little bit more flexible with regards to certain things as well.
I think that well, what are your thoughts on streaming now that you've kind of like done one? For me, I think it might almost be the way forward. I think that unless you're doing like certain like cinematic things with replays and stuff like that, basically what you're doing when you sit down and record is you're doing the same thing that you'd be doing on a stream. You're just able to interact with people more. I think that that's something that people kind of gravitate towards. Like they want to be able to like talk with content creators and not have that kind of barrier that exists between them where you're like, yeah, you're discussing things after the fact and you're like in the comment section or whatever. But I feel like streaming kind of combines both of those experiences in more real time. I think that's probably the way moving forward, at least for me. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I think Total War is one of them, especially with multiplayer stuff. It's one of the more awkward things to stream, I guess, because one of the things with Total War that people do like to see is they like to see like the nice camera angles of like the armies clashing, the units doing their thing. When you're actually playing the game, it's a little bit more difficult to do that because you could be looking at, oh, this is a nice engagement here, and then all of a sudden you pan back out and half your army's been clattered by like a full cavalry charge. And you're like, well, I'm doomed. That's the end of me. So there is that, especially in Med 2 related stuff. But I think with streaming, I'm just gonna, as with most things, to be honest, with my channel, I'm just sort of rolling with it for the time being because I can't I can't really make any long-term plans considering the current situation. But I'm 95% sure that I'll be continuing as I am until February of 2021, and from there, who knows. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the situation as it is. I think that videos off, like being able to record in advance does allow you to be a little bit more choosy, I guess. Like, I think battle replays in particular, I think they do suit the video format more than streaming. But one thing that I would say as well, that campaign stuff definitely suits streaming more because long form content like that doesn't really suit YouTube at all.
Not anymore. I think that we've kind of moved past that a little bit, and I think I talked about that a little bit on stream. But I think moving forward, especially for anything campaign related or like long kind of playthroughs in games, like if you're going to be playing like The Witcher or you're going to be playing some long, very concentrated playthrough of a certain game, like Fallen Order, for example, yeah, you're going to want to stream that because one, it's friggin' boring to just sit there on your own at your computer and just like talk to yourself. And it's kind of strange. When you could be doing that with, you know, an audience and getting feedback, and, you know, people can help you make your way through the game and solve puzzles and challenges and things like that. And it's a hell of a lot more fun, I think, for everybody involved. And no one really, you can also like drop it really quickly and whenever you need to, because, you know, 2-3 episodes in usually is when people start to lose interest and they're like, yeah, I want to go do something else. And then you can, you know, play through that. And if people want to see some more later, then you can pick it up again. But at least you're not, you know, sitting alone in a room, you know, talking to yourself. It does make it a little bit, I think, more manageable on your own like sanity, but it's also way more fun, more fun to interact with an audience.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Like if you're doing like longer form stuff like that, then a stream is definitely the better way to do it. So if I do like a Total War campaign, it would definitely be in that format, I think. But yeah, like my regular schedule is not going to be changed for the moment, unless people like tell me like you should do streaming more instead of releasing more videos, then I will do that. But I don't think that'll be the case. I think people will want me to stay doing what I am in addition to maybe the occasional stream.
So now that Pixelated Apollo is stepping back from Total War, have you thought about maybe that being like an opportunity for your channel to grow, or is that something that, again, you're not worried about it? You're just kind of rolling with the punches and just.
Oh no, I'm not really paying too much attention to that, to be honest. Like I'm not rubbing my hands together like, yes, he's gone now, they're all mine, because like no, not anything like that. If I do get an uptick, then great. If I don't, then it's not really too much of a concern, to be honest with you.
Fair enough. So we'll start to wrap it up just a little bit here, but let's talk about something unrelated to gaming and that sort of thing. Now this is one that I think will really get people's blood going. So do try to be respectful with each other and be respectful of the people involved. There's been a lot of like crazy YouTube controversy, like big old idols and stuff who have kind of been like brought low in a few ways. Now, Angry Joe had some pretty serious allegations leveled his way, and now actually Jenna Marbles, one of the biggest YouTube content creators, is stepping away from her channel as well. Are you familiar with some of what's going on there? Or do you need like a brief rundown?
I've seen stuff in trending, but that's about as far as I go. I try not to pay too much attention to that purposely, but if we're going to talk about it, then I should probably know a little bit more about what's happening.
Fair enough. So the basic premise there is that Jenna Marbles has been on YouTube for friggin' ever, like I think almost a decade. Actually, it's been officially a decade, I think. And you know, she made some what some people would refer to as problematic videos back in the day. They involve, you know, a little bit of blackface, and she's a comedian, so like doing impressions and things like that. One of them was of Nicki Minaj, for example. So now she's basically stepping back, and people are trying to, you know, get her canceled and things like that.
Let's see,
hashtag cancel culture or whatever. So that's kind of where that's at right there. And so I think the main question here is, at least I think this is probably the most interesting thing to talk about, is the amount to which we idolize famous people, and we kind of put them on a pedestal and expect them to, you know, be the best of humanity in certain ways. And, you know, when they're not, we're all shocked and horrified and angry, and, you know, people want to drag them kicking and screaming from their platforms. You know, what do you think about that?
I think it's complicated because there is, especially now, it seems like people are getting pilloried for minor things, or more minor things than like would justify having their life turned upside down. On the other side, like a lot of famous people tend to go a little bit ballistic, and like it's remarkable really when someone like makes it, as it were, and like they're set, and then like they almost like go looking for ways to throw it away by doing something stupid. It's kind of it really does depend on the scale of what someone's done. Like I feel as though like some slightly, by today's standards, tasteless jokes are not really cause to try and tear someone's life down, but a lot of like people want to earn social media points, don't they? And that's one way that they try to do it, unfortunately.
What do you feel that maybe we idolize people that are kind of in the limelight a little bit too much, and we like make them, you know, more than men, as it were? Well, give me your thoughts on that, and then I'll give you mine.
Is this the royal we, or like me specifically?
This is the royal we. This is us generally.
Okay. Yeah, maybe a little. I think people want to see the best in online personalities. When, yeah, I think maybe they are idolized a little bit too much. I think, to be honest with you, we were just talking about streaming. The fact that people who are sometimes watching these people are willing to throw huge amounts of money at these people.
Oh, I've seen some crazy donations in the thousands of dollars.
It's a sign that people are buying a little bit too much into it. Like, it's one of the things that would make me personally uncomfortable is if I was doing my thing and someone was suddenly to drop something 3 figures or higher at me. Like, I would be like, are you sure you want to give that to me? It would just make me feel a little bit. But so, like, streamers, like successful streamers, will play people off against one another in a rather manipulative way to get more.
Do you have an example of that?
No,
no,
because I don't actually watch that many streams, but it is something that I've seen talked about.
Okay,
with like backup as well. It's not just something that I'm pulling out my ass. I mean, we all know that sort of thing happens. Like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I personally don't like the way that like online personalities have sort of set themselves up, which, you know, I don't like the term. Like, one thing that Pixelated Apollo said in his video where he's quitting Total War, he doesn't like the term influencer, and neither do I. It sounds gross.
It's pretty corporate. I'll give you that.
And like, that's pretty much my take on that. Yeah, we idolize people too much, I think, online especially.
I think that's what you brought up earlier with streaming is a really good point. The people want to have like more quote unquote intimate relationships with the content creators who make the entertainment that they consume, and I think that we're moving towards that more and more as streaming becomes more and more prevalent. And you know what? I think that we do have a tendency to, how do I want to put this? We want to idolize people. We want to see the best in them, and we want to ignore the worst. And it kind of makes them more than human. And I think that's a big disservice, not only to the audiences, but to the content creators themselves, because it doesn't really leave a lot of room for personal growth and for things changing over time, the way that, you know, what has happened with Jenna Marbles. Obviously, she'd never make a joke like that today or do any kind of bit like that today. But this is 10 years ago when, you know, tastes and opinions and what, you know, how far we were kind of willing to go is very much different. So I think that I don't think anybody famous should be idolized, to be perfectly honest. I don't think that, you know, Brad Pitt's opinion matters more on anything than, you know, somebody else's. I think what's important is we look at the content of people's character and make decisions based on that, and not like destroy someone based on something they did 10 years ago. Because I guarantee every person who has showed up to this party, pitchfork and torch in hand, has done something similar. Maybe not, you know, exactly that. Yeah, there's something that everybody is afraid to have other people look at. And I think that the more that we idolize these people and the more that we expect them to not have that behavior because, oh, they're different, you know, I like them, I respect them, they're funny. Nah, funny, smart people do stupid crap all the time, and they're not any different from us in a lot of ways. So I think that our tendency to put these people on a pedestal is what leads to a lot of this outrage. And to be perfectly honest, I think that shit needs to stop, because we're in one way or another, and this is gonna get me demonetized. You just watch. We're all kind of fucked up, and we all have stupid things that we've done and that we've said and that we regret, and, you know, opinions that we've changed our mind on. And I think until we're willing to kind of come to terms with the fact that, like, there's like shitty dark stuff about everyone that you know, even people that you like and respect, then this outrage stuff is never really going to stop. Everyone's willing to throw the first stone, but no one's willing to kind of do the introspection necessary to be like, wow, yeah, you know what? I'm not amazing either. And we can hold people accountable and we can talk about that. But, like, you know, the death threats and the trying to get people deplatformed and stuff, like, it's just too much. And there are certain, no one deserves death threats, but there are some people that I think I don't even, I don't even like deplatforming, but I think that there are some people that like we should strongly condemn. But like someone who makes, some jokes 10 years ago that fall flat nowadays, now that our tastes have changed, we don't get to go back and dig that up and be like, wow, look at you, you're such a scumbag. Everything you've done between now and then, and everywhere, as far as you've come between, who you were 10 years ago and where you are now, none of that matters. I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'd go with that. I think the bigger the group, like the more detached it gets as well. So like, I think us, like, we're all basically part of the same community, and it's not to the size where weirdness starts to ensue. So I think we're all quite lucky in that regard, to be honest, because like I don't have my own community really. Like I'm just a satellite of the community that already exists, which I quite like, because it means that nothing is really springing up around me personally, which I wouldn't really feel that comfortable with. So yeah.
I don't know. I'd say you have your own community. I think that you've definitely built up a bunch of people that like enjoy watching you specifically and probably wouldn't enjoy other people quite so much.
Yeah, I guess, but it's still all relatively tied into the same greater whole, as it were. Maybe that'll change over time, but I don't necessarily think that would be too much of a blessing. Even if it is a sign of growth, I don't think it would be like universally a good thing.
Potentially. I certainly think that you're going to see a decent amount of growth over the next little while, especially since Pixelated Apollo is stepping back from Total War, and that is important to a lot of people. So even if they don't, immediately unsubscribe and go on an angry rant on like Twitter about how unacceptable that is or something, I think you're going to see more people look for that content, and they'll probably
Perhaps.
you.
We'll see. We shall see. The internet is wild.
The the internet is certainly wild. So we're at about just over an hour and a half. So I think that's probably a good time to wind things down a little bit. For those of you out there who are interested in some more live streaming, I will be picking up SFO in a little while. They've actually got a new update that's come out today, and I would like to play around with them. We're probably going to play the Empire. So that'll be coming up pretty shortly. Thank you so much to Umad for joining me and for sharing his thoughts, and for everyone who participated in chat and kept things respectful and didn't tear at each other like we've seen so many people fall into.
Hopefully we can do a little something tomorrow in Silmarillion if we can gather enough people.
I would love that. I think that'd be a lot of fun. We could do like some live stream. Maybe we could be on the same team for once. That would be amazing.
Yeah, I think if I'm doing a stream and I'm talking to you directly, then maybe it'd be a good idea to be on the same team.
Maybe. But yeah, so I've also got a podcast coming out on Sunday. We're going to be talking about some of the stuff that we talked about here, but we will be looking at sort of the neutrality of reviews, the nature of early access. I know that's been on a lot of people's minds lately with the Last of Us controversy. Alana, I can't remember her name. Alana Pierce actually did a couple of really good videos on that from the point of view of game developers, but I also had a chance to talk to a couple of Total War YouTubers as well. One of them is Legend of Total War, and he gave me his perspective on early access and things like that. So yeah, that'll be coming out on Sunday, early in the morning at about 8 o'clock Pacific. So if you guys are interested, I recommend that you tune in. It should be a really good episode. But again, thank you to you, Mad. Let's say goodbye to everybody.
Goodbye, everyone.
Take care.
Take care. I'm getting out of here.
Yeah, peace out. Peace out, as we say in Canada.